Right now, somewhere in your house, a plant is dying, and you're probably feeding it the exact thing that's killing it. Most gardeners reach for a bottle of blue fertilizer crystals the moment leaves start yellowing. It feels like the responsible thing to do. But soil scientists have spent decades studying what actually happens underground when we do this. And what they found is uncomfortable. In a huge number of cases, that feeding is the final push that sends a struggling plant over the edge. Here's what almost nobody realizes. A dying plant isn't usually starving. It's suffocating, dehydrated at the cellular level, or chemically overwhelmed, and store-bought fertilizer often adds fuel to a fire that was never about food in the first place. But there's a quieter tradition, one that predates garden centers entirely. Long before synthetic fertilizer existed, farmers were reviving exhausted soil and half-dead crops using things sitting in their own kitchens. 5 of those methods still work today, and they work faster than most commercial products because they don't just feed the plant, they repair it. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which one to reach for, depending on what's actually wrong with your plant, why the more is better instinct destroys root systems, and one mistake almost every beginner makes in the first 30 seconds of trying to help a dying plant. We're going to go underground, literally into the root zone, where the real story of a dying plant plays out completely invisible to us. You'll see why a plant that looks hungry is often actually drowning. You'll learn what commercial growers have known for generations but rarely explain to home gardeners. And you'll walk away with 5 natural fertilizers, the exact situations each one solves, and the mistake that turns a helpful remedy into a harmful one. One of these 5 is sitting in your kitchen right now. You probably poured it down the drain this morning. Let's start with the one that saves plants the fastest. Number 1, eggshell calcium water. Have you ever noticed a tomato plant with leaves that look perfectly green and healthy? Except for one detail, the fruit is rotting from the bottom up, turning black and leathery while the rest of the plant thrives? For years, gardeners assumed this meant disease. Entire treatments were built around fungicides and soil replacement. But agricultural researchers eventually traced the problem to something much simpler. The plant's own transport system had failed, and it had nothing to do with pests at all. Picture calcium moving through a plant like water climbing through a tall building's plumbing. It only travels one direction upward, through the transpiration stream, pulled along as the leaves release moisture into the air. If that flow is interrupted, even for a few dry days, calcium simply stops arriving at the fruit. The plant isn't lacking calcium in the soil most of the time. It's failing to deliver it. The mistake most gardeners make is treating this as a fertilizer problem and dumping in synthetic calcium supplements, which often contain salts that make water uptake even harder, worsening the exact delivery problem that caused it. Here's the fix. Save eggshells. Rinse them and let them dry completely. Crush them into a coarse powder and steep a handful in a gallon of water for about 48 hours. That water, not the crushed shells scattered on top of soil, is what plants can actually absorb quickly. Because the calcium has already begun dissolving into a form roots can pull in immediately. Within about a week, new fruit sets without the blackened bottoms, and stems that were splitting under pressure begin to firm up. But calcium delivery is only half the story of a dying plant. The other half is happening somewhere most gardeners never think to look inside the soil's microscopic engine room. Number 2, banana peel potassium soak. Here's something strange. 2 identical plants. Same pot, same light, same water, yet one stands upright with rigid stems, and the other flops over by afternoon like it's exhausted. What if the difference has nothing to do with water at all? Potassium doesn't build plant tissue the way nitrogen does. It doesn't get incorporated into leaves or stems permanently. Instead, think of it like a pump operator, working around the clock inside every plant cell, controlling tiny valves called stomata that regulate water pressure. When potassium runs low, That pump fails, cells lose their internal pressure, and the entire plant loses its structural rigidity, not because it's dry, but because it's lost the ability to hold itself up. Commercial growers have long relied on potassium-rich amendments for exactly this reason, particularly with fruiting plants. Because weak cell pressure also means smaller, less flavorful fruit. The mistake most gardeners make here is assuming a droopy plant needs more water. They flood the soil, and because the real problem was never moisture, the plant droops even harder, now suffering from both weak cell pressure and soggy, oxygen-starved roots. The solution is almost embarrassingly simple. Chop banana peels and soak them in water for 2 to 3 days, then use that liquid to water the base of the plant. The potassium and trace minerals leach directly into water your plant can use immediately, without composting time. Within days, stems that were bending under their own weight start standing straighter, and flowering plants often push out blooms that are noticeably larger than the ones before treatment. That solves structure. But there's a mistake so common it might be happening in your kitchen right now, and it's arguably the most overlooked natural fertilizer of all. Number 3. Coffee grounds nitrogen boost. What if the waste you throw away every single morning is one of the most effective plant revivers available, and almost everyone uses it? Completely wrong. Coffee grounds are loaded with nitrogen, the nutrient most directly responsible for that deep, saturated green color in foliage. But here's the part most people never hear. Fresh, undiluted coffee grounds piled directly onto soil don't feed a plant quickly. They form a dense, water-repellent crust that can actually block moisture from reaching the roots, at all the opposite of help. Think of nitrogen like a plant's protein supply, essential for building new leaf tissue and chlorophyll. A plant with pale, washed-out leaves is often mid-collapse of its own green machinery, unable to produce enough chlorophyll to keep photosynthesizing efficiently. Without that pigment, the plant can't generate the energy it needs to recover from anything else going wrong. Long-term gardening observations, passed down through generations, point to the same fix: used coffee grounds. Not fresh ones, brewed and cooled, worked lightly into the top inch of soil or steeped into a liquid feed. The brewing process has already broken down the compounds that would otherwise slow decomposition and lock nitrogen away from the roots. The mistake almost everyone makes is piling grounds thickly around the stem like mulch. Instead, mix a thin layer into the surface soil, or better yet, soak used grounds in water overnight and pour the strained liquid at the base. Within a week, new leaf growth tends to emerge, visibly darker than the older, struggling foliage beside it, a clear, visible signal the nitrogen is finally reaching the plant's core. Nitrogen fixes color and growth. But there's a category of dying plant that no amount of nitrogen, potassium or calcium will save, because the actual crisis is happening in the soil itself, not the plant. Number 4. Epsom Salt Magnesium Rescue. Have you ever seen a plant with leaves that look almost tie-dyed, deep green veins running through pale, yellowing tissue, like the color is draining out from between the lines? Most gardeners assume this is disease. It almost never is. Magnesium sits at the center of every chlorophyll molecule a plant produces, functioning something like the core of a battery. Without it, the plant can build the outer structure of chlorophyll, but can't actually generate the reaction that captures sunlight. The result is leaves that look structurally fine, but are functionally starving for light energy. Which is why the pattern shows up between the veins. First, those tissues run out of magnesium before the sturdier vein structure does. Soil scientists have noted that magnesium deficiency is especially common in potted plants, because repeated watering slowly washes it out of confined soil in a way that never happens in open ground. The mistake most gardeners make is reaching for a general-purpose fertilizer, which often contains far more nitrogen and phosphorus than magnesium, doing nothing to correct the actual imbalance, and sometimes making it worse by encouraging leaf growth the plant doesn't have the energy to support. The historical farming fix is Epsom salt magnesium sulfate dissolved into water, roughly 2 tablespoons per gallon, applied directly to the soil every few weeks. Because it's already water-soluble, there's no waiting on decomposition. Within about 10 days, the pale tissue between the veins starts regaining color, working outward from the veins like the plant is slowly repainting itself. That handles the plant's internal chemistry. But there's a final piece almost nobody addresses, and it's the reason so many revived plants quietly decline again a few weeks later. Number 5. Seaweed and kelp extract. Here's the real problem with everything we've covered so far. You can fix calcium delivery, potassium pressure, nitrogen color, and magnesium chemistry, and a plant can still fail to recover. Why? Because none of those nutrients matter if the roots themselves have lost the ability to function. Picture root hairs like millions of microscopic straws, each one responsible for pulling water and dissolved nutrients into the plant. Stress from drought, transplant shock, temperature swings, or root disturbance damages these structures faster than almost anything else that happens to a plant. And a plant with damaged root hairs can be surrounded by perfectly balanced nutrients and still starve, because it's lost the machinery to absorb them. This is where seaweed and kelp extract behave differently from every fertilizer already discussed. They're not primarily feeding the plant with major nutrients at all. They're delivering natural growth compounds that specifically stimulate new root hair development, alongside a wide spectrum of trace minerals that plants use in tiny amounts but can't function without. Commercial growers have used seaweed extracts for generations, particularly after transplanting or during recovery from stress, precisely because the effect shows up in the roots first, before it shows up anywhere visible above soil. The mistake most gardeners make is treating seaweed extract as a last resort, added only after a plant has already declined for weeks. Used that late, the plant may have too little functioning root tissue left to respond quickly. Diluted seaweed extract applied directly to the soil, ideally at the first sign of stress rather than the last, encourages a visibly denser root system within 2 to 3 weeks, and a plant with a denser root system can finally make use of everything else you've given it. That's the piece that ties all 5 together. Nutrients don't help a plant that can't absorb them. Absorption is the foundation everything else depends on. Here's the biggest lesson hiding underneath all 5 of these methods. A dying plant is almost never asking for more food. It's asking for a specific missing piece of a system, a transport pathway, a structural mineral, a pigment builder, or a functioning root. And once you identify which piece is actually broken, the fix is often something already sitting in your kitchen. Store-bought fertilizer treats every dying plant the same way. These 5 methods don't. Eggshell water for calcium delivery, banana peel soak for structural collapse, coffee grounds for chlorophyll and color, Epsom salt for the yellowing between the veins pattern, seaweed extract for root recovery after stress. The next time a plant starts declining, don't reach for the first bottle on the shelf. Look closely at what the plant is actually showing you. The leaves are telling a very specific story, you just needed to know how to read it. If you've tried any of these 5 and watched a plant come back from the edge, tell that story in the comments. And if this changed how you'll treat the next struggling plant on your windowsill, you know what to do next.